Okay, well, this class is... yeah. If you're watching this recorded online, I promised some people I would record this. Sorry. You've missed 5 minutes of this class because I forgot to hit record. I'll just say really quick what the heck this class is about. Well, there's a big study that was just done called The Great Dechurching. I gave this class the live folks all the details. You can look it up if you want to know the details. But the big conclusion of the study was that over the past 25 years, 15% of Americans, which is 40 million people, who formerly went to church have stopped going. And what did we say? That's the what?
Greatest change, loss of...
It's the greatest change in church attendance in American history. Okay? So the question is, why has this happened? Well, this is what the study leaders concluded. Okay? These are not my conclusions. These are their conclusions. Okay? And some of these study leaders are evangelical Christians. So number one, the end of the Cold War. So if you go back 25 years, we're at the end of the Cold War. During the Cold War, what's happening?
We're worried about getting nuked.
Okay, yes, we're constantly worried about the end of humanity, right?
And then Korean War, Vietnam, blah, blah, blah.
Right, and so during the Cold War, what else is happening?
Building bomb shelters.
Bomb shelters, what else?
Civil unrest.
There's some civil unrest. There's also something that starts with P, ends with patriotism.
Patriotism.
Yeah.
If you're a proud American, you're a God-fearing Christian, and if you're a Christian, you have to be.
Yeah. Yes. There is this sense. There's this sense of good versus evil, whether it's right or wrong. And having grown up in that era, I still have this great nostalgic love of the Gipper, because I was a second grader sitting in my Emerson Elementary School class when the Challenger exploded. And I remember that night watching his speech as a second grader with my family. And we talked about that for weeks. But he was such a comforting guy, I know not all of his policies were great, but no one can knock his ability to communicate and bring people together in moments like that. And so after the Cold War ended, things changed. This is the second big reason: the fallout from the religious right and the moral majority. And there's a lot of ways we could explain this. And I will explain it a little bit more in detail. But as soon as this started, in 1977, who is the greatest example of, one of the greatest examples, we'll say 76, of Christian leadership in the United States? Jimmy Carter, right? Right? There's a big change in that 4 years. And during that time, there were a lot of warnings about what will happen if we get real extreme. And it seems like those warnings have come to fruition, okay? So fallout from the religious right, moral majority, and number three, the shrinking of the world. Not just through the internet, but also the economy became what? Became an international economy. We started to realize how small we are. There are people in this town who make yearly trips to China because those are their sales customers. And it's hard to keep one frame of reference about your beliefs when you're constantly exposed to other cultures and other ways of belief. The world has gotten a lot smaller, is what I'm trying to say. So what else did the study conclude? Well, it gave some interesting things about who has left. And everyone repeat after me. These are not Tom's conclusions. I'm just reporting what the study said. Okay. I'm just reporting to you, okay? No one get mad at me. Who has left the church in the biggest numbers? what they're now calling the secular right. So, formerly churched evangelicals who consider themselves on the far right of politics. That's the biggest group that has left the church. Most of the people who have left the church, stopped attending church, live in the Bible Belt. And that could just be because that's where most of the church-going people went. But they live in the Bible Belt. And the largest declines have been with Presbyterian PCUSA. They lost 45% of their membership. United Methodist Church.
I'm one of them.
37% of their membership. And the Baptists, specifically the Southern Baptist Convention.
Amen.
If you count all the Baptists together, it's 29%.
Wow.
But the Southern Baptists have lost, just in the last decade, 3.5 million people. So who are these people? Who are these people who are leaving churches? Well, a lot of them identified as moderates, meaning, let's just ask that question among ourselves for a second. Why would moderates leave the church when it feels like it's getting more extreme? Did I just answer my own question?
You answered your own question.
There were a lot of people who identified as being in the middle, either religiously or politically, who felt pushed out of their churches on both sides. On both sides. People who have described themselves as right-wing evangelicals. So this is the second largest group, and this was because they said their church had bad politics. But most of their churches tended to lean to the right. So that's an interesting category we could talk about if you want to. I kind of don't want to talk about it, to be honest. Gay, lesbian, queer, transgender folks are one of the third, or about the third largest group. Millennials, and then Gen Z.
What age group is millennials?
So that would be the generation just below me.
Okay.
And my wife says I'm not, but it's my wife's generation. She's 5 years younger than me. She says she's 6 years younger than me. The truth is she's 5 years and 11 months younger than me. So I call that 5 years and she calls that 6. So. Anyway, she's a millennial, her age group, so upper 20s to mid 30s, let's say. Maybe late 30s. I might be going a little too low, but those are millennials. And Gen Z is the generation behind them. Okay, I'm going to keep going. What are the surprises in the study? Everyone loves surprises, right? In every tradition, in every age group, the more educated you are, the more likely you are to still be attending church. That goes against common wisdom, or what people would say about church attendance. The trend was going the opposite since about 1950, and over the last decade it has shifted radically. What are some reasons?
Because a lot of the people who are lesser educated tend to fall out of church and attend church by listening to more radicalized radio programming.
Okay, what else? These are just guesses. Say more about that.
I've got a college degree. I work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. If I didn't have a college degree, I'd probably be working weekends and night shift and things like that, or I could be less easy to attend.
Yes, 100%. That is one of the big reasons.
Poor people don't believe in God because they're not getting their needs met.
Okay, That is
Because
also
they're not what?
both of what you two just said is almost verbatim in the author's conclusions in the study. What else?
I think people, they might be looking around and thinking some of these answers they can't answer. God's the only way that there is an answer.
Okay, maybe. What the study concluded was that people who are more educated tend to see the cultural value and importance of religion for society. People who are more educated tend to trust institutions more. And people who are more educated they had a more academic way of saying this than I'm going to say it, but they tend to be less likely to immediately distrust somebody. They're not going to quickly believe a conspiracy theory or something, and they tend to give people the benefit of the doubt until they prove otherwise. That was what the study concluded. Here's another surprise. Since 2017, total mainline church attendance has not declined at all. In fact, it's gone up. If you put all the so-called mainline, which is Episcopal, Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian, all these traditional, they used to think of them as upper class churches. It's not at all that anymore, but they still call it the mainline, usually because they require a seminary degree and 3-year college or a seminary before you can be ordained, stuff like that. But they've increased by 2%. That's a big surprise. Also, there's only one generation of all the generations now living in the United States who have, over the last decade, increased their church attendance. Does anyone want to make a guess which all the others have gone down? No.
How about those old millennials? They get blamed for everything.
No, they've gone down a lot. Bloomers have gone down, but only by like 3 to 5%, which is
Gen X.
my generation. So in 2017, 55% of us went to church. And now in 2022, or 58%, 65% go to church. We're the only generation that has improved our church attendance, which I think is also fascinating. So, why am I telling you all this? Why is Tom giving me all these depressing and some surprising church statistics? Well, I'm going to tell you by telling you the short version of my story. I know a lot of you, probably all of you have heard it, but for me, I was fascinated by this because I feel like I am this study. Were it not for a few small key decisions or interruptions by God or something, I would be one of those statistics. Because in 2008, I was a minister in the Church of Christ, and I, one day, just had enough, quit my job, and left. And at the time I left, I thought I didn't believe in God anymore. And that's because I grew up in a fundamentalist church that did such a good job, and actually I'm being unfair. I grew up in a fundamentalist tradition that did such a good job at teaching its members that their way was the only way, that when you left that tradition, it was easier to quit going to church than it was to consider going anywhere else. Does that make sense? And actually, the church I grew up in, the congregation I went from first grade through 10th grade in, was not like that. For that tradition, it was progressive. And some of my seminary professors said, well, that's the reason you're still in church. If I had grown up in a more right-wing version of my childhood denomination, I would have done what most of my friends did, which is became evangelical atheists. They took that same dedication and zeal that they had for their church and applied it to non-belief and trying to convince other people to join them in their non-belief. Like a.k.a. Richard Dawkins, those radical atheists who are writing all these books these days. My point is, I had kind of given up on church, but then I had this realization, I don't know where it came from, that I was still actually praying. And if I don't believe in God, why would I be praying? And then I had this realization that, wait a minute, my big problem isn't really with God, it's with the Bible. And then eventually I realized, oh, my problem's not really with the Bible, it's with how I was taught to read the Bible. And then I realized, wait a minute, the majority of the Christian world never dreamed of reading the Bible the way I was taught to read it as a child. And they're still Christian. So maybe I should go and find out what they think. And somehow all of that exploration eventually led me into an Episcopal church. And here I am. But why was my church that way? Here are my conclusions. And this is where this is going to get really boring. If you're not bored yet, you're going to be really bored now. Are you ready? Ready. You guys ready to be bored? Okay. Good.
So ready.
Here was my big conclusion. In my evangelical / fundamentalist tradition, we were a bunch of Gnostics. Does anyone know what a Gnostic is? So Gnosticism, everyone repeat after me. Gnosticism is the first heresy of Christianity. So in the early Roman world, they had all these mystery religions, right? And they're coming up. These mystery religions have been around a long time before Christianity, but they really gravitate towards Christianity. And they see in Christianity a lot of similarities to their tradition. And they believe that there's a good God and a bad God. And the Gnostics saw, these are the early versions of some of the early Christian Gnostics, but they saw our Christian scriptures and they said, oh, okay, so the good God is Jesus. And the bad God is the God of the Old Testament. That's how they interpreted the scriptures. And the early Christians didn't quite know what to do with that and how to explain it to them. No, that's not quite right. But, Jesus taught us who God was, these things. And then they took it, there's more to it though, because in Gnosticism, all flesh is evil. So, does it sound familiar? Is this starting to sound familiar? All flesh is bad. So therefore, Jesus could not have come in the flesh because how could he be the good guy if all flesh is bad? So he only appeared to come in the flesh, or maybe he was a spirit who indwelt a human body for a little while. And then when he died, it only seemed like he resurrected because you saw his really alive spirit all of a sudden. And then you keep going and you find out, well, and the way you're going to be saved, my new Gnostic Christian friends, is by learning all of the scriptures, memorizing them, so you can argue with your, as much as you can. You have to memorize this, learn our secret knowledge, because you're only saved if you learn the secret knowledge. This is like a 2-minute summary of something that's much more complicated, but that's Gnosticism in a nutshell.
Were they talking learning the scripture, Old Testament and New Testament?
Yes, and also their scriptures that we don't have. We have some of them. The Gospel of Thomas is an example of it. You've probably seen that talked about on radio, TV shows. They have Gnostic influence anyway.
I have a kind of a weird question.
Okay.
But would that be like Illuminati?
Well,
Like you gotta be in a secret thing
Yes.
to have knowledge of this
Yes.
certain thing or
Yes. You know, have you heard the saying, what goes around comes around?
Mhm.
All the same stuff just keeps coming around. But yes, it's all about, it's like secret societies, secret knowledge, and you're saved by this secret knowledge. My point is, I was raised in a tradition where I was taught the flesh is evil, right? And when I die, I'm going to be like a cloud in the sky in heaven. And that the way I'm going to be saved is what? By memorizing the New Testament, because what is the term I'm looking for? You'll be transformed by the renewing of your mind, study to show yourself approved, all of those things. And if I can get the knowledge right, and I can believe just that right thing from that important list of knowledge, then when I'm baptized, I'll be saved. And what if I believed slightly the wrong thing about one part of that? Well, I got to go do it again. Be rebaptized with my correct understanding. Okay? There's hardly any difference between that and Gnosticism. You can't have the Eucharist if you're a Gnostic. Why? Flesh is bad. Flesh is bad. You can't have baptism. Can't think baptism is very important if you're a Gnostic, because
It won't do any good.
yeah, flesh, right. It's all about your knowledge, right? Right? Jesus can't have come in the flesh because flesh is bad. It's all about the secret knowledge that you can learn. And that is, the more I learn that history, the more I realize this describes most of the fundamentalist world. Okay, this is just I'm giving you my story right now, and these are my conclusions. We're not talking about any study anymore. You guys got that, right? Okay, so I also concluded we just don't understand Scripture at all. At least the tradition that I came out of. And I'm going to tell you why I think that is in just a second. But we had completely and we didn't just misunderstand it, but then we abused Scripture, and we used it as a weapon, and we abused other people with it. That was my conclusion. So far from leaving the true church and spending the rest of my life being a depressed atheist, my conclusion was that I just had never really understood Christianity in the first place. I had understood parts of it, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying everyone in my childhood tradition is lost, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying for me, I had never understood Christianity. And by Christianity, I don't mean the Episcopal Church. I mean Christianity you see in Scripture. So, I want to tell you, this class, the reason we're doing this class for the next 8 weeks, and maybe longer if it's interesting enough, is that something is broken in our culture and in our churches. And I don't mean the Episcopal Church, I mean the United States. Something is broken. And one thing that's broken is the middle ground has been completely lost. Why is that a problem?
Because only half of you are left.
What?
The middle ground is where people who are still kind of questioning things find their way into or find their way out of the church more broadly.
Okay, good. What did you, somebody else said something.
If the middle ground is lost, that's where the majority of us are,
Okay,
I think.
right? I feel like this church, that's true.
Well, yeah, and that's all I know about, so.
Sheila?
So if someone was on a fence, they're gonna fall either way.
Right.
There's no middle ground, you're left with two extremes. You can't really progress when there's two extremes.
And there's no way to unite the
Right.
extremes.
You can't listen to anybody else's idea or learn from anything somebody
Right.
else thinks.
Say that again, Rusty.
There's no way to unite the two extremes if there isn't a strong middle to understand both sides and create dialogue rather than diatribe.
That's what I
Right.
meant. That's what I meant.
So we're not really communicating with each other.
Say that again real
We're
loud.
not communicating. We've lost the communication.
We've lost the ability to communicate with each other. And that is true not just in the church, that is true 100. We all know that's true in politics. We all know that's true in politics.
Lost the middle class too.
Yes, it's quickly disappearing. And I want to say more about that, and I'll probably have to say it next week, but we need to talk more about the poor and why they're unchurched. But, okay, something else that's broken. The church's relationship with politics is broken. This past week I was listening to a podcast called Ask N.T. Wright. This is total church nerd, okay? I love N.T. Wright. I don't agree with him on everything, but 98% of things. And he has a podcast where people call in and ask him questions. And he had a guest. Guess where the guest was from.
Oklahoma.
He is from the United States. He's from Texas, so no cool British guy to listen to. Guy with a Texas accent. And N.T. Wright's with him. And somebody called in and asked the question, or wrote in, and they said, I'm kind of wishing I wasn't recording this now. But they said, can you be a Christian and vote for Joe Biden? And this was a Roman Catholic. And what they meant was in the context of the United States. And N.T. Wright was very confused by the question because he's British and their political divisions are completely different. And he just says, well, of course they can, in his proper British accent. Why would you even ask such a question? Well, then the American piped in. And they only spoke for 5 minutes answering this question, but I was ticked off by the end of it. And they didn't even really draw a conclusion. He managed to end, he said, well, I guess you could maybe in theory, but somebody who voted for Joe Biden is probably going to hell. Basically he drew these really radical conclusions. And I'm not telling you who to vote for, but if you draw lines like that in church, where you don't give people room to make a decision in private in a voting booth, it was weird how N.T. Wright this question dumbfounded him. Like he couldn't even relate to it hardly. And the American was ready to pounce. And to me that was and I thought about playing it for you, and I thought, no, this could make a debate in the room. Because we're Americans and so we gotta learn. And I decided not to. But our relationship with politics is broken. And I think a lot of it comes down to this point. Everyone repeat after me. Radical individualism.
Radical individualism
And Christianity.
and Christianity
Don't mix well.
don't mix well.
When I say radical individualism, what I mean is every generation of people, or let's say we'll go by century, every century of people is influenced by like a predominant philosophy or theory of life, and so if you were a first century Christian or person living in what we call today the Middle East, right? Living in Palestine or Bethlehem, how did you see yourself?
Part of a community.
You're a tribe. You're part of a tribe, right? If you're Jewish, you're part of a tribe, right? You're part of the people of Israel, tribe of Judah. If you're and you're part of a community. So I didn't look at if I was that person, I wouldn't say I'm Tom Dahlman and I'm a priest, and I'm whatever, or I'm John Stobie and I'm a dentist, or whatever. You would have said, I am a Jew, a member of the tribe of Judah, son of Bethuel, daughter or, son of Mary, your name might not even come up till you get to the 5th or 6th on the list. Because what's most important to you? Your tribe, your people. You see yourself as one part of a whole. If you are born in the United States in 1800, you start with your name, it's all about you, in other words. Radical individualism. And it's really great for settling the frontier, for surviving on your own in the woods, building log cabins, and doing stuff like that. It's not good for living in community. It puts a strain on things. And we have this faith that says, turn the other cheek, love your neighbor as yourself, regard not your own interest, but the interest of others. I could keep going. If a soldier compels with you to go with him 1 mile, go with him 2. Someone asks you for your cloak, give him your shirt as well. Whereas my first thing, that's against my personal rights. Right? You get what I'm saying, right? Well, it didn't work. They need to pull them. So, do you see where the conflict starts to happen? Radical individualism and Christianity do not mix well. Well, why does that matter? That matters because we tend to pick up Scripture and read it from whatever perspective we live in. And if I pick up the Scripture and read it as a member of a tribe, thinking about my tribe first, I'm going to come away with a completely different conclusion than if I pick it up and I think, wow, this is a book that's written just to me. Like a gold box coming down from heaven, like the Book of Mormon literally was handed right to Joseph Smith. And when you read it through the lens of, this is just for me, in my life, all about me, my book for me to help me go to heaven, or so I can be rich and successful, me, right? You're going to have completely different conclusions about what Paul is saying, what Jesus is saying, than somebody who would pick it up and start with, this is a guy who was tribal like me, which is true because the people who wrote it were members of what? Tribes or city-states. Does it make more sense that the writers of Scripture were thinking like a first century person or like us? And which one? Yeah. I think that is the big reason we have misunderstood Scripture. Because we have started we forgot that you have to begin with a little interpretation and context and history to try to understand Scripture, to try to arrive at truth. And we've also read it, and by we, I mean mainly evangelicals, where I came from, that by this special knowledge we'll be what? And if we get it wrong, we'll be... So that's worth fighting over, right? That's, maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's not the Scripture. Maybe it's not God. Maybe it's not Jesus. Maybe the problem is us.
Maybe.
Huh?
No, maybe.
Yeah.
That's those 3 fingers coming down back at you.
So why, and here's why I'm saying this to Emmanuel Episcopal Church. Here's my point. And I want to say this without saying that I think we're awesome. Because then we might as well just all go back and become fundamentalists if we start saying that. Because we're not super awesome, okay? But due to an accident of history, we have something to offer into this situation. What is that accident of history? Huh? Yeah, we're a church motivated by... Where did our church come about, though? Well, keep going. Think broader. Think broader.
Civil War.
Anglican Communion, where did that come from?
Catholic Church.
Yeah, but how did this church develop, right? who was the, if you've taken my confirmation class, who's the queen?
Mary.
Who?
Mary.
Well, Mary took him back to the Roman Catholic Church. And then who? Queen Elizabeth becomes queen, and they had been Roman Catholic under Mary, and everyone's saying, hey, are you going to be Catholic or Protestant? And what does Elizabeth say? She says, wait and see. Let me think about it. 5 years later, well, let me think about it. 10 years later, let me think about it. Who are you going to marry? A Catholic or a Protestant? I don't know.
Nobody.
Wait and see. Let me think about it. Eventually, well, women can't really rule, can they? Well, just let's wait and see. Right? 50 years later, everyone's still waiting and seeing, and she's like the greatest ruler in English history. And she never answered that question about whether she was going to be Catholic or Protestant. And eventually, we have what's called the Elizabethan settlement, which is, I will not make a window into men's souls. We'll have common prayer, not common belief. So, in other words, we'll be focused on what our shared practice is, not our interpretation of whether the Pope is out of the church or not, or whatever your issue du jour was, who cares? We're going to pray together. And the reason she did that was political, was because she's smart, because she's trying to hold a country together. She's trying to get Protestants and Catholics to stop killing each other. There's a lot of good motivation, but also just survival, right? That is an accident of history. We come from a church, we come from a tradition that was born out of conflict, trying to get people to stop killing each other. Guess where we live now? In a country where it seems like the left and the right are trying to kill each other. Our churches can't stop fighting, so much so that they're emptying out like crazy. And there's a lot of people, just like little Tommy Dahlman, who are in town, in this town, and I know them, I can tell you their names, who gave up on God, not because they really didn't believe in God or Jesus or faith, but because the institution had failed them so badly that they equated God with that institution. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And I personally think it's a lot harder to not be in heaven forever with God than it is to be anywhere else. So I'm not saying this out of my motivation to get you all to go save souls, because God is more gracious than any of us, and loving and grace-filled and merciful. But isn't it sad if somebody, looking back on myself, I think a lot about what would my community have been? Where would I have been? What would have happened to me? Because I really enjoy all of you folks. I mean, and not just you, but the folks at my old parish, my seminary friends. I found like community that I thought I had lost forever here. And so I'm not saying this to say I want to build up this institution, so we need to go spread the message of the Anglican way. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is, I think each person here, if that happened, great. But I think if each person here has something to offer into lives of people who've given up on faith and given up on God and given up on church, because they think there's only one way to do it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And it's fighting and division and whatever. You guys get it, right? So that's why I'm doing this class. And so next week we're going to talk a little bit about why the poor don't go to church, but also we're going to talk about some point of doctrine that everyone thinks every Christians believe this way. But then we're going to actually look, maybe Scripture doesn't say that, and we're specifically going to talk about heaven and hell, okay? The next two Wednesday nights. And it's going to be really weird, okay?
You did say the next few Wednesday nights.
Yeah.
That's a lot of ground to
next
cover.
two Wednesday, yeah. It is. And I want to tell you right now that I'm not going to tell you for sure what's going to happen because I don't know, because I've never been there. But all right, thanks everybody.